Okay, hello. Now, if this works as planned, you should be able to see what I'm sharing here on the screen. Now, I'm on the FDA government website, and this is something that's also put together by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and it was updated in revised January 2025. Now, some of you who follow me on Facebook, you may remember when I said several years ago, first started talking about it in 2021, again in 2022, 2023, when I started to see a lot of sports people. Footballers was the first one that really drew prominence, but then we started seeing it on the basketball pitch, baseball field, American football, you name it, was happening everywhere, in the swimming pool, all sorts of things. Young people collapsing with heart attacks. Now, people were telling me, oh, this is normal. Don't think so. It wasn't something that I was accustomed to seeing, and people I spoke to, they weren't accustomed to seeing it either. Anyway, so I mentioned this and I was saying, well, could it be anything to do with the thing that was mandated that they had to get before they went back on the pitch to play? And initially they were playing, well, I don't know about where you live, but in the UK, they were playing to sometimes cardboard cutouts, but the stadiums were completely empty. But still, because they were intermingling, they had to be vaccinated with the COVID vaccine. And I talked about the fact that when I looked at this research in March 2020, so before the vaccine had been rolled out, while they were just talking about it was in production, etc. When I heard this term mRNA, I thought that's interesting. It seems new, novel, and it's very interesting that they're saying they're going to be able to get it out by the end of this year. So I went and looked back at some of the old research. Holy hell, in a frickin' handbasket. What I saw was shocking beyond belief. So I was like, well, this cannot be the same drug because the research that I was looking at had the lab rats at that time, they were using lab rats. This was many, many years ago. They had the, pustules and developed growths and cancer and tumors and all sorts of things. And then they had problems with the nervous system, heart problems, lung problems, kidney problems, you name it, every system. It was crossing the blood-brain barrier, which is a no-no, really, and if you're not taking something that is designed to impact the brain. So I was reading all of this and thinking, well, this can't be the same drug, surely. But then gradually, as we pushed into 2021, a few doctors started speaking up and saying, oh, hold on a minute. So anyway, with all of this in mind, and I'm seeing the sports people dropping like flies right in front of us on live television, and many of them sadly did not make it, as in they died. I was put a post out saying, well, it's very interesting to see what's happening on the sports field. Could there be any relationship between these two variables? Correlation isn't causation, but where things are correlating, and they've had the intervention because that's what we were being told. They were mandated, they had to have that injection, that vaccine, in order to get back onto the pitch. Or if we're talking about actors and actresses, in order to be on set, even people who were not acting, makeup artists, hairstylists, etc., they were also being mandated. And there were some famous clips where certain actors there was an outburst, when they realized somebody wasn't vaccinated. So it wasn't speculation. And at that point, everyone's proudly talking about the fact they were vaccinated. They had the banners on their social media accounts, for example. And everybody was asking, you're trying to go into, people are going into bars, nightclubs, etc. You got somebody with an earpiece asking you about your personal medical information. It was a norm for everybody to be asking if you're vaccinated. Suddenly, however, when people started collapsing and dying, it was rude to ask if they were vaccinated. Somehow that was terrible and offensive, and how dare you, and how insensitive. I'm like, hold up, just a minute. Only a few short months ago, some stranger outside of a nightclub is asking you in the middle of the street, or you want to go into a restaurant, and they're asking you if you've been vaccinated, and suddenly now it's a taboo subject. So put this post out on social media. Oh my God. It was like a rugby scrum. People piled onto me and piled into me to tell me what an idiot I was and that there's no relationship between those two things. Someone, a friend, also decided they would award me with the Darwin Award for making such a stupid post and correlation. So let's get to what we are looking at here on this screen. You might have already been reading over my shoulder, depending on where it's placed my video. This is the package insert for the spike facts. Now, there's another package insert for the patient, but I'm just reading the one that just says package insert. So it's fda.gov/media/155675/download ? Attachment, if you want to go and read this for yourself. And this is a PDF. So I'm on page 4 of 44. I'm going to read you what it says. Let me pull it up a bit higher. So it says 5.2. So we're on, this is technically page 3, but there's a header page, so this makes it page 4. Myocarditis and pericarditis. Post-marketing data with authorized or approved mRNA COVID-19 vaccines demonstrate increased risk of myocarditis and pericarditis, particularly within the first week following vaccination. For Spikevax, and this is the one, there are other vaccines, this is the first one I pulled up. For Spikevax, the observed risk is highest in males 18 years through 24 years of age, although some cases required intensive care support. Available data from short-term follow-up suggests that most individuals have had resolution of symptoms with conservative management. Information is not yet available about potential long-term sequelae. Sorry, I have to laugh because even if you're not someone who watches the news, you were probably during 2021, 2022, even 2023, pushing maybe into 2024, depending on the news outlets you're looking at, safe and effective, 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 safe and effective. The side effect was maybe a pain in the arm, whichever one you got vaccinated in. Maybe a little bit of a feverish thing, might feel a little bit fluey. That was basically it. That's all they told you about. And now, on page 3, technically page 4 of the report, they are telling you that they don't have any long-term data. Now, this is not a surprise to me, because in 2021, I was on a Zoom call with a chief medical officer for a particular region. And I specifically asked them about contraindications. And I also said, and can you tell me about the clinical trial data for the contraindications for those who already have existing autoimmune conditions, which I, technically do due to a previous NHS treatment that went wrong, and I was gaslit to within an inch of my life. They were telling me it was all in my head. So I know how this game kind of is played. Anyway, so I asked for the clinical trial data. You know what they said to me? They said, Marilyn, it will be 2 to 3 years before we have the data you are asking for. And then in the next breath went on to tell everyone it's safe and effective. Now, my brain is like, hold on a minute. If you've just told me there's going to be, and actually I didn't believe them, not because I didn't believe what they were saying. I absolutely believe, and they believe what they're saying, etc. I'm not sort of saying that. What I'm saying is I didn't believe their answer because I suspected back then in 2021 that the medical industrial complex and that the pharmaceutical industry would not find what they were not looking for. I didn't think they will be looking for side effects. I didn't think they would be looking for the contraindications in various mechanisms. All they were interested in is injecting everyone and telling them it was safe and effective, even though they had no long-term data. And it's now coming out, if you haven't been paying attention, that people on the clinical trials, the Pfizer clinical trials, I think they had a few from some of the others as well, but I'm talking about the people who did the lawsuit, Pfizer clinical trials, when things started to go horribly wrong, you know what they did? as in the pharmaceutical companies and the FDA and the CDC. They ignored them. One of them, Maddie DeGarre, is in a wheelchair still to this day. They put, number one, they first of all say it was in her head. Oh, she must be suffering from anxiety. She was a fit, healthy, sporty girl, now in a wheelchair. Eventually, when they did put it into the report, Maddie is down as suffering with a stomach ache. She's being fed by a tube. She's in a wheelchair. Does that sound like a stomach ache to you? There were other participants who were spending tens of thousands of dollars because they were so ill and they're trying to put right what the vaccine has done to them. They were told, the vaccine company, the pharmaceutical company, they were told they would be taken care of when they started the clinical trial. I don't think they anticipated mafia style care. And actually, I think that's an insult to the mafia. Mafia, I apologize. Don't want to put you in the same, category as this lot. One of the participants, one of her treatments was over $4,000 per go. She had several of these treatments and several other things that she was doing, just trying to regain her health. The vaccine company, the pharmaceutical company, eventually offered her $495 in full and final settlement. She said no. You know what they did? They put the money into her bank account anyway. When have you known an organization that you say, no, I don't want that, they're going to put the money in anyway? They offered her less than $500 when just one of many treatments was $4,000. This is someone they told we will take care of you. And they were all ignored. Some of them said that their symptoms, what happened to them, or the deaths of their loved one, and their loved ones died as a result of being part of the vaccine clinical trials, the COVID vaccine clinical trials. They had loved ones who died, and that data was not being put forth to the public. That data was not appearing in some of the reports that were being sent around to convince people to be out there as a mouthpiece saying it was safe and effective. So we're sitting here now looking at item 5.2, myocarditis, pericarditis. If there are any footballers watching, American footballers, baseball players, basketball players, rugby players, tell me something. Number one, were you told about this risk? And number two, when you were given the COVID vaccine, were you told to stay off the pitch for at least a week or two? Because there's that little golden window. However, from what I saw of the clinical trial data that I was reading in 2020, this thing keeps on rolling. It is the unwanted gift that keeps on delivering. Now, what was horrifying about those first clinical trials, it wasn't that the rats who first succumbed died a horrible death with these growths and tumors and sores and pustules and organ failure. That wasn't the worst of it. One of the worst things for me was that with the others who survived that, you know what they did with those lab rats? Have a guess while I pour myself some water. Feel free to put in the chat. What do you think they did with those lab rats? Which I believe was worse, almost worse than what happened to the poor ones who died straight away or within a few days and weeks. What they did with those lab rats is they killed them. Now, why do I say that's worse? What that means is there was no long-term safety data. And from what I saw of the way that this operates in the body, and I said this at a meeting, it probably wasn't my finest moment, new girl on the team, and I land them with a bit of a truth bomb, and I said, look, I think this thing is dangerous. I don't think you should be out there pushing it and intervening in people's lives. And I believe that 12 to 18 months after vaccination, we are going to see the first big wave of unexplained, allegedly unexplained deaths, people just dropping down dead. That is exactly what happens. If you go back and you check the mortality figures and statistics, we have an organization here in the UK who publishes, well, they did publish them until people really started reading them, and then they started to stop publishing them. But most of the governments around the world publish their excess mortality figures. Exactly what I said in terms of those spikes, no pun intended, spike vax, is exactly what happened. Am I psychic? Am I just a good guesser? Am I a futurist? I'll say yes to all three. That's exactly what happened. And then, however, I said we're going to see the first big wave and big spike in deaths from this vaccine 12 to 18 months after vaccination. But I also suspect 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, we're still going to be seeing the side effects of that. However, at that point, even 12 to 18 months after, people are not going to be making that link and connection, and they will be able to explain it away. That is exactly what happened. Even when people were dropping down, either collapsing or dying, just within minutes or hours of having the vaccine, people were still being gaslit and told that it must be something else, can't possibly be due to the vaccine. And that is also, families who did interviews after their loved ones died, and they said, well, could this be the vaccine? They said they got the cold treatment, stone cold treatment from the paramedics or the doctors or the surgeons or the physicians or the GPs that they spoke to, because nobody wanted to hear it. So, coming back to that post, the Facebook posts where people piling in to duff me one in terms of linguistically with their words, not physically, thankfully, touch wood. But where that post where people were piling in and telling me what an idiot I was, and that I'm just seeing things that weren't there. And of course, conspiracy theorists, blah, blah, the usual stuff. Here we are on page 3, technically page 4 of this report, with it here for you in black and white. Now, one of the things they say is, it's all resolved and it's no problem. And then you listen to cardiologists who are saying, well, actually, myocarditis and pericarditis can be dangerous because the heart doesn't immediately regenerate itself. Once it's damaged, once it's got scar tissue, that can cause legacy problems further down the line. But again, you're not going to get that information because there's no long-term. And when I looked at the reports here, what was interesting, when they got a list of the side effects, I actually can't see any. There's no mention of myocarditis and pericarditis, unless my eyesight is failing me. Now, I know it's pretty small print. So we got local adverse reactions, pain grade 3, auxiliary swelling, tenderness, We got a couple of that, hardness as well, grade 3, arrhythmia, redness, fatigue, lots of fatigue, headaches. I got chills. I don't sing, shouldn't do that. I apologize. I got chills, nausea, vomiting, fever. And I'm thinking of Elvis Viva Las Vegas. I'm sorry, I've got a jukebox in my head. And use of pain medication. So it just goes on. Now we're here to hit M, so we would expect to see myocarditis here, would we not? Yeah, it's not. It's just not. It's not here. So I'm just like, what's going on? What's going on? Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy. Facial swelling. Serious adverse events, facial swelling. There were no other noticeable patterns, but you've just told us about about heart problems. So yeah, I'm reading this report. I'm like, somebody make it make sense, for the love of God and all that is holy. Yeah. Anyway, there we go. So for the people who said it was in my head and I was making it up and there's no connection between the vaccine and heart problems, you might want to come and have a look at this data. This is the very first one I've read. I haven't sat and read all the package inserts because it's a website. Dr. Brian Ardis was just talking about it. So I thought I'm going to pull it up and just have a read of this. But this is where we are so far. All right, then. Well, I'm going to stop sharing that. And what can I say? I'm going to leave it there. I will put somewhere around this video, I will put the link to this report so you can have a read of it for yourself. And maybe you just want to ask yourselves a few questions. And one of the things I've been saying for the last 5 years now, because in 2020, I fully expected that warnings would be issued to tell people about the contraindications, to maybe start pointing out the people who should not be getting this vaccine, and to put the monitoring in place. That didn't happen. Then I thought, well, surely 2021, the vaccine is here now. It was released in many places in December 2020, but started going full tilt with the rollout. And then, of course, the mandates came in where people were, so I've been told people weren't forced to take it. So let's just say they were coerced into taking it. Because when you say to someone, no job, no jab, for me, that feels more like coercion and tipping into blackmail than it does making a free will choice, because that's a big consequence. Some of us who've been speaking out, okay, speak for myself, we feel the consequence of that, where people are no longer working with you because you're speaking out and asking uncomfortable questions. So when somebody puts that on the table, no job, no jab, it doesn't necessarily feel like a nice, free, informed consent choice. So what I was saying 5 years ago, and have been saying for the past 5 years, I'm like, look, if you want to inject yourself with that, go right ahead. You're an adult, do what you like. However, warn people about the potential dangers. Now, I'm going to have to go back and look at that report again, but my first glance, you were looking at it with me as well in some respects. I didn't see the information about the acceleration of cancers. That is something that oncologists around the world have been talking about. And that's one of the things that I saw in those the early clinical trial data. I didn't see the information about the brain aneurysms. That is something. Now, for those of you who are in the UK, and I felt sure actually when Lisa Shaw died, she was a BBC radio presenter. She had a brain aneurysm in 2021. I believe it was March 2021, but please check the date. But early 2021, brain aneurysm. She died. Now, she thought she had just a sudden, very bad headache. It took a turn, and her partner had a coroner's inquiry, had a coroner's report, shared the autopsy data. There was no doubt. I believe she had the AstraZeneca. Again, check that. Lisa Shaw is her name, SHAW. Her death was due to the COVID vaccine. I felt sure at that stage they would start warning people what to look out for. No, they were still just banging on about the pain in the arm, the injection site, maybe feeling a bit fluey. And it wasn't just Lisa Shaw. There was a tradie. I remember reading around a similar time, a tradesman in Australia. And this one was they're all heartbreaking deaths. Of course they are. But this one was, there was time, there was a window of time where something probably could have been done. And the coroner's report, their version, said, yes, that is true. Unbeknownst to his wife, he'd been feeling very unwell since getting the COVID vaccine. So she wakes up in the middle of the night, about a week after he's had the vaccine, and she's like, I'm not feeling well. And he says to her, I've not been feeling good. And she says, let's get you to the hospital. Let's go to accident and emergency. Let's get you checked out. This doesn't look right, because he's getting worse at this point. And it's the first realization she has about how bad he's been feeling. He goes into the bathroom to get dressed and she hears a thud. And he collapsed against the bathroom door. So she couldn't actually get in. So she's trying to open the bathroom door, but with the weight of his lifeless body, he couldn't get in. So by the time the paramedics came, he'd already died. And of course, they're trying, in the toing and froing, she's been told it's just one of those things and da 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 da. She wasn't having it. So she insisted on a full autopsy, coroner's report, etc. Just like Lisa Shaw, it came back saying that he died of a heart attack due to the COVID vaccine. What was really heartbreaking about it is that when they did a bit more forensics and they looked at his search history online, he had been searching, I want to say Googling, because many people use Google. I know there are lots of other, DuckDuckGo, Brave, etc. I know there are other browsers, but just going to say he was Googling, or whatever the Australian version would be, symptoms side effects for the COVID vaccine. However, because the propaganda machine had been telling everyone it was safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. Like, it's like that, remember those nodding dogs you used to have in the back of the car back in the day in the 1970s and 80s? Because that propaganda was flooding the media, and people who were speaking out about the vaccine harms were being shut down. Again, this is not a conspiracy theorist. Mark Zuckerberg himself testified to Congress that he was told to shut the groups down where people were congregating and finding each other and talking about their vaccine injuries. Doctors and surgeons and physicians who are asking the kind of questions we've been talking about here today had their Twitter accounts shut down. Or if they didn't shut them down, they were shadow banned. They had their Facebook accounts shut down. LinkedIn, you name it, they were booted off the social media platforms. They were not getting any mainstream news coverage, of course, because the mainstream news was also safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, and just parroting what they were being told by the pharmaceutical companies, and in turn, what was being fed to the medical industrial complex. So when he did his search to see whether what he was experiencing was possibly an adverse event, an adverse reaction to the COVID vaccine, he couldn't find anything. So then he reasoned, well, it's just all in my head. Let me just pull through, man up, etc., whatever it was he said to himself. And as a result of that, he died unnecessarily, because when he started searching, if he had been able to find information about the potential dangers and side effects, he most likely, they found, would have sought help rather than brushing it off as one of those things and thinking it was all in his head, etc., etc. And again, like Lisa Shaw's husband, his wife pushed for this information and she pushed for it to become public. There are so many others I can think. I think his name is Ernesto. His son, it was either around 12, 15, something like that. His dad said, we felt we were doing the right thing. And also his son wanted to play football and they weren't allowed on the football pitch. The last glimpse he had of his son was before they put the lid on the coffin. And he actually did, one of the images I saw, he did an open casket shot because he wanted people to see what was happening, what was going on out there, what was happening to young people. And they've all been silenced. I don't know if you would have seen the thing about Lisa Shaw here because she worked for the BBC. So it's going to be pretty hard to ignore that one unless you're completely cold and callous. But you probably haven't heard these stories, many of these stories on the mainstream, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of them. I've been watching these people speak for the last coming up to nearly 5 years. We're pushing into going to be into the 5-year mark soon. And there was one that was particularly harrowing. Well, as I said, they're all harrowing. 2 parents who decided they did not want to get the COVID vaccine because in their terms, they were clean. They didn't take any medications, didn't do drugs, and clean living, all the rest of it, took care of themselves, were very, very healthy. Their daughter, in their words, hadn't been sick a day in her life. And ironically, she wanted to go on a school trip that was talking about human rights. In order to go on the school trip, surprise, surprise, mandated she had to have the COVID vaccine. So she's discussing this with her parents, and her parents said, we would rather you didn't have it because we feel it's dangerous. There are some side effects that are not really being talked about, and they're kind of having this conversation. Because what the governments then started to do was encouraging children to have the vaccine without the consent of their parents, she snuck off, had the vaccine. So she goes on the school trip. Suddenly the parents get a call saying your daughter isn't very well. We don't know what's going on. We're going to, maybe she'll sit this one out and see how she is and da-da-da. So they're back and forth now. They're in this dialogue with the school. It takes a turn for the worse. So they have to, get the daughter out of there. By the time she gets to hospital, oh my God, let me think. It's either 9 or 13. Let's just go with 9, but even 9 is a shocking number. She had 9 heart attacks. This is a girl who is fit and healthy and well, and her limbs went black. The doctors, the physicians who were attending to her case, the nurses, they were all saying, we have never seen anything like this. We don't know what's going on. After she died, the mother said, the video is out there. The mother said she was brushing her dead daughter's hair. She died about 30 minutes previously. The attending physician comes in and says, we don't need an autopsy. And then off they go. So the parents never did an autopsy. Now, with hindsight, of course, they wish they had done. But she said she was so grief stricken. She's sitting there brushing her dead daughter's hair. Physician comes in and said, these are the physicians who are saying, we've never seen anything like this. We don't know what's going on. And 30 minutes after she died, her body is still warm. The mother is brushing her hair, and they open the door and say, oh, we don't need to do an autopsy. Because the interviewer said, well, what did the autopsy say? And then the mother recounted that bit of the story. If you can make that scenario make sense, go for it. So they've been speaking out as well, and they didn't realize, because they were like, well, what happened? What's going on? And then one of the kind of friends, the school friends, college friends, whatever grade she was in, they said, oh yeah, she had the COVID vaccine. So, but she didn't tell her parents, because that behavior was also being encouraged. And there was also talk, at least here in the UK, about lowering that age of consent. So children as young as 12 could go to school and get injected with things that their parents had no knowledge of and didn't consent to. I don't know where that is in the process, but there was talk of that in order to speed up the vaccine uptake, as they put it. Anyway, I think I have probably ranted long enough, so I will leave it there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. For those of you who had the vaccine, please let me know. Were you given informed consent? As in, were you told about the side effects? Were you told about the possibility of the myocarditis, the pericarditis, the heart attacks, the brain aneurysm, the blood clots? I don't think it's any surprise now about the blood clots. And one of the things about blood clots, they can lead to some of the things I've just been talking about here. The cancer is the one that is not being really talked about at all, apart from oncologists, as we got someone here called Professor Angus Dalgleish, for example, who said he started seeing that his patients, cancer patients who were absolutely fine, they were in remission, had been in a remission sometimes for decades, suddenly, after they had the COVID vaccine, the cancer's back, they're out of remission, or people who had never really been sick, they've been perfectly well, they coming in presenting with stage 3 and stage 4. And at first he's like, whoa. He said they all had one thing in common. They'd had the COVID vaccine. He started speaking to oncologists around the world. They were reporting the same phenomenon. That's not true. He recently, as in, I think it was about 4 or 5 weeks ago, was finally on Sky News here in the UK. And he also did Sky News in Australia a few months ago. He's not getting any mainstream airtime. And he has come up with a much healthier, safer way to treat people who are in this position. He cannot get the funding. So for those of you who had the vaccine, were you told about these potential side effects? Were you told about the Guillain-Barré syndrome, the Bell's palsy, all that sort of stuff? Were you told about it before they injected you? Please let me know in the comments. If you don't want to say so in the comments, send me a DM. I'd be really interested to know, because so far, with the people I've actually physically spoken to, none of them thus far were told. There must be some of you out there who were. Anyway, I shall leave it there. Marilyn Devonish, the Neuro Success Coach, Rapid Transformation Specialist and Futurist, over and out. And I really sincerely hope that you are all fit and healthy and well. I will catch you later. And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if you feel so inclined, feel free to share this. Maybe you don't want to share it publicly, because I know there's still a lot of stigma around this, but you might want to send the link to somebody that you care about. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.